Let me just respond. Are you going to let them in now?
It's everybody now. I'm admitting everyone.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We will get started shortly. We're just letting everyone in the room before we get going. So maybe a minute or two. Thank you for your patience. And if I can ask you to please keep yourselves on mute. So just check if you are on mute. If you're not on mute, put yourself on mute for me, please, so that we can just avoid any background noise. We'll get started in a minute or two.
Noted. Thank you. Good morning, Sandile.
Thank you.
Morning. Hi, Russell. Hi, Claire. Those I can see. Hi, Anisha.
Morning. Hello, Sandile. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks, Russell.
Morning, Sandile.
Sandile, just because you can't see me doesn't mean you can't greet me.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Anyway, it's good to see your name, Sue.
Good morning, Sandile.
Morning, everybody. Good morning, Ahmed. Those I can see. Hi, Anisha.
Morning. Hello, Sandile. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks. Great.
Sandile, just because you can't see me doesn't mean you can't greet me.
All right. Good morning, everybody.
Wow, you guys are a lively bunch on a Thursday morning. Hi.
Those I can see.
Okay.
Morning. Hello, Sandile. How are you doing?
Thanks.
Sandile, just because you can't see me doesn't mean you can't greet me.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Okay, let's get going. We are a lively bunch on a Thursday morning. Hi. Sorry, we're just having a little bit of feedback, so I'm just going to switch that down. Okay, let's see if that's a bit better. Right, guys, are we ready to rock and roll? Welcome, everybody. Good morning. It is 3 minutes past 11. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you, and we have a very important topic that we are talking about today, and that is our Savrala AARTO feedback to Savrala senior leaders. If I may ask you, please, to keep yourselves on mute, so that we can avoid any of the background noise. The chat is open. If you would like to add a question into the chat or you would like to make a comment, please feel free to use the chat. As I said, it is open. We are also recording today's session, and it is being streamed live on YouTube for those people who were unable to access Zoom because of their IT policies in-house. So I will keep letting people into the room, but if I could just ask you to please keep yourselves on mute, that would be wonderful. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Sandile so he can unmute himself. Sandile, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Natalia. Let me also just greet my colleagues and thank them for having made time to attend this important session. I think it's important to also, before we start, to just flag our competitive, notice, just to, impress upon everyone that this meeting is not intended to collude or anything like that, but it's intended to, discuss, matters affecting the industry. On that note, let me once more again just welcome everybody. This is intended to be a very brief sort of feedback. It's an important feedback as we, gear ourselves for this last mile. As colleagues know, we have for several years now participated in various meetings and workshops to try and ensure that AARTO is more focused on changing driver behavior and not just revenue generation by, the various authorities. an administrative process which takes advantage of the available technology without compromising road users' rights and access to justice system. We've also focused on, applying, the whole demerit points directly and proportionally to those factors that account for the greatest cause of road deaths and injuries. Now, simplifying the act so that it can also be understood by all road users and so that it's easy and it's understood by all road users. And I think lastly, to ensure that accurate and timeless road traffic infringements, including road user death and injury data, is collected and made available to both inform policy and focus action campaigns. Now, Savrala, through the TBCSA, which is the Tourism Business Council, as well as the BUSA, which is Business Unity South Africa, through its membership, was fortunate to attend the various NEDLEC AARTO discussions over the past years. And as you all know, that this has been lingering for as long as I've been in Savrala, even before my time. It is regrettable that, after much effort by all and having reached some key priorities and principal agreement with all the partners at NEDLEC, the process was somehow halted around 2016 without any notice. However, we got an opportunity as Savrala, when it was resuscitated again, to present to the Portfolio Committee on Transport around March 2017, and I think the members were updated accordingly. Fortunately, the NEDLEC AARTO team reconvened again in 2017 to ensure that any planned implementation has been discussed with NEDLEC's key business, labor, and community partners. I just believe that it's important to give this background, prior to, the feedback that will be given shortly. It's important to give that view. As Savrala, we obviously welcome the opportunity to submit our comments on the proposed amendments. Savrala supports any intervention which would lead to the reduction in the unacceptable level of death and carnage on our roads. It is our intention to try and actively participate in any initiative driven by the Department of Transport to achieve our decade of action goals, and we look forward to a constructive end to this long road. Now, obviously, it's important that these constructive engagements in this partnership. It's so coincidental that I just got off the call with the NEDLEC team, because there's a NEDLEC meeting taking place this afternoon. So we had to caucus, just re-looking at the process within NEDLEC, together with our colleagues at DOT. Now, in concluding just this background, I must also just repeat, colleagues, that over the years, Savrala has engaged both the various authorities and agencies with regard to AARTO, the Act itself, and has submitted, where practical and where when made aware, comments to represent our members, particular AARTO administration challenges. Regretfully, these have not been successfully, met, and obviously, the outcomes were not successful. And as a result, this has led to a number of members instituting legal actions against the Department of Transport and its road traffic agencies. And these are known things that have transpired over the years. Further legal action was taken as our members continued to be unable to get hundreds of thousands of traffic fines successfully redirected. Now, the consequences of such administrative challenges can result in enforcement orders being issued incorrectly against our members, in particular our car rental members, rendering them, for example, unable to operate their fleet when seeking to either register a vehicle or purchase a license copy. It is for that reason that we've kept AARTO as one of our key focus areas over the years, because certainly it has such an impact. So as a consequences over the years, significant financial loss has been suffered by our members. The current proposed amendments create further administrative challenges, aside from being founded on questionable legal prescripts. Our industry is acutely aware of the need to collectively work together to address the current and continued road carnage on our roads, which robs the country of future leaders and cause enormous hardship on those left behind. But we continue to hold the strong view that the various AARTO amendments over the years have been designed to do little more than expedite the revenue generation capacity of the respective agencies and not encourage a change in behavior of in our roads, which was what AARTO was intended for. Now, before I call on our guest this afternoon, let me just conclude by saying, with these comments that we've put together, there's been quite a fair amount of consultation. I must, thank the subcommittee, which has been actively involved, with myself, and in making sure that, we comment accordingly. And I must also just thank the other members that have made submissions. It is disappointing that there are a few members that never really, for whatever reasons, bothered to respond, but it is hoped that they will also benefit in whatever that's put together. We have yesterday, I've circulated what is the draft that has been arrived at this stage, and the final submission will be in a couple of days. It may just be slightly changed. At this stage, ladies and gentlemen, let me call upon Claire, but I'd ask Natalia to just, if you could, Natalia, just go through Claire's bio for me, please. Thank you very much.
Of course, no problem. Thank you so much. So we are joined today by Claire Tucker, who is a partner in Bowman's Johannesburg Office Corporate Department and is head of the Public Law and Regulatory Practice. Her master's degrees in law and development make her well placed to assist in projects involving the interface between law and policy. She has worked on a wide range of regulatory matters, including drafting of laws and regulations, High Court review applications in respect of decisions on regulatory matters, the implementation and application of statutes, as well as commercial and transactional advice. Claire practices in and advises on all energy, natural resource, and environmental issues, particularly renewable electricity regulation, nuclear energy, gas, mining, petroleum products and pipelines, atmospheric pollution prevention, waste regulation, water, land use planning, and EIAs. She specializes in energy-related matters and particularly in procurement and government contracting aspects of this. She regularly advises on broad-based Black economic empowerment matters. Claire has a BA and LLB from the University of Witwatersrand and an MEC in Law and Development from the London School of Economics. Claire, the floor.
Thank you. That was a bit of a mouthful. Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Sandile, for asking me to get involved in this interesting project for you guys. So the brief basically was just to assist in collating the comments and also to provide context for them. And I think that one of the most important sort of pieces of context that we all have to understand in commenting on these regulations which have been put out is that the regulations themselves are what we call subordinate legislation, or they are enactments that are simply meant to implement the primary legislation, which is the AARTO Act. So when we're making comments on them, we need to understand that there's a little bit of a constraint insofar as you can say, you know, X or Y regulation is simply wrong or is simply unacceptable. What we have to comment on rather is that the scheme as a whole is unacceptable. And it's sort of quite an important piece of context that people should maybe bear in mind when they're reading through the document that Sandile distributed. As Sandile has outlined, there's been a very long history of AARTO implementation. We've sort of had 10 years of AARTO, the creation of the RTIA, the pilot scheme in Tshwane and Joburg to implement aspects of AARTO, always with the prospect of the demerit system floating along in the background. I think that the reason why we're now, you know, submitting a sort of a 50-page document into the process is that although there's been that sort of 10 years of submissions and of trying to refine the system, I think that we all understand that where the rubber really hits the road, so to speak, is going to come in when the demerit point system is implemented. And these regulations are very much the sort of final piece in the process of allowing the implementation of that demerit system. But as I say, when we comment on these regulations, we have to understand that the demerit system is not coming about because of these regulations alone. The amendments that have been taking place to the AARTO Act itself over the course of the last 2 or 3 years has laid the groundwork for how the Department of Transport is planning to implement the demerit system. And as I say, a lot of the provisions in these regulations are simply implementing provisions that have already been passed by Parliament in the amendments to the AARTO Act. So just to explain that a little bit more clearly, last year in 2019, those amendments to the AARTO Act were finally passed by Parliament. They've been waiting with the President to be assented to. And as I understand it, the plan is that those amendments and these regulations will both come into operation on the 1st of July next year. And at that stage, the system will sort of be ready for its phased rollout according to this plan. I mean, obviously, I think that the comments have tried to highlight to the Department of Transport that there are actually a lot of policy issues around this that remain entirely unanswered. As Sandile says, the fleet and car rental sectors have been making submissions on the complete unworkability of many elements of the system for a long time. Notwithstanding this, the amendments to the AARTO Act passed through Parliament anyway, and so that primary legislation is already in place for really the whole of the system that is contemplated by these regulations. So ultimately, you know, what Savrala also asked us to consider and to sort of, you know, potentially start preparing for is to say, well, if this all does get implemented and it is a disaster, is there any prospect of setting the regulations aside, challenging their implementation, undertaking some kind of a process like that? And as I say, the one comment that I made was that, well, the regulations themselves, you know, aren't really what you would have to attack. It would have to be the primary legislation. And as we all know, it's fairly difficult to set aside something that Parliament has enacted. You know, what this emphasized for Sandile and the members of the subcommittee and myself was that in this interim period, whatever engagements you can have with the policymakers to try and get your point of view through and into an amendment process sooner rather than later, you know, it really is an important time to re-energize those engagements, which Sandelia said are happening within NEDLAC, within BUSA, and in those sorts of forums, so that the sort of real sort of financial problems and practical problems that will arise from the implementation of the system will be put before those decision makers sooner rather than later. So that's just a bit of background to the legislative scheme within which the regulations that we're commenting on exists and comes to be, and what the options really are for challenging that process, and why it's so important to try and sort of get amendments into the process as we go, hence the fairly detailed submission that we've prepared. I'll just stop there and see if anyone has any questions on the overall scheme and how it's being implemented before we maybe turn to some of the specifics of the comments on the regulations that are being proposed.
Thank you, Claire. If you have a question for Claire, please feel free to throw it into the chat, or perhaps use the non-verbal cue to put your hand up so that we can call on you to pose your question. Anybody have a question for Claire?
Sandelia, I'm not sure if you want to just add anything to that sort of context, just, given where you guys find yourselves.
I guess, the only thing I can say, which members have already perhaps hinted, it was important, just the process that we followed, the fact that the matrix was sent to the subcommittee, and that the matrix, highlights every bit of important clause, for lack of a better word, at this stage. And it ensured that at least we don't miss on anything that may otherwise affect our industry. And, the document does appear long, but, I strongly believe, having, over the years submitted various, made various submissions, I believe that it's important that, to have more than less. So at this stage, I think, I've indicated that we'll probably do some slight cleanup and submit it differently. But I'm happy with the background that you've given, just in terms of just the relation with the act as well. It would be interesting just to get some sort of questions from the floor.
Don't seem to have any questions that have come up yet.
I've got a question. I just want to ask, obviously, if the regulations go forward, especially with when you redirect and nominate traffic fines and all of that, is there an obligation on the government to make it possible for us to comply with the law? Because with the current systems that are in place, it's almost impossible to comply with the law, especially if you don't have the sort of computer systems that, like what the big car rental companies have. If you're a small car rental company, it is almost impossible, because you do your nomination or your redirection, but the only way you can get feedback is by looking and seeing if the fine's off your name. And the only way you'll know if they've received it or even registered it, by the time the 30 days or the time periods that they stipulate will have gone by the time you realize that they didn't even receive your letter or process your nomination. So, what is the legal standpoint on that?
So it absolutely is a requirement that legislation complies with the rule of law, and the rule of law essentially requires that it has a degree of rationality. A rationality inquiry doesn't require that you or I would kind of say, oh yes, this meets our standard of rationality, but it's a sort of objective standard of rationality that would require that, you know, it is in some way grounded in reality. And I think that what, you know, the very clear feedback has been is that, as you say, if you just look at the percentage of unsuccessful nominations that there are presently, you know, which are kind of around the 20 to 30% mark, even worse under COVID times. If those unsuccessful nominations result in demerit points for this industry, it simply will be impossible for you to operate, because there will be so many vehicles that are inhibited from operating because of the accumulation of demerit points. So there is a requirement that legislation, as I say, is not unhinged, you know, which I think is what we sort of feel, that the full operation of this and the imposition of demerit points on juristic persons who, as you say, are not able to properly redirect or nominate will be. The sort of, as I've kind of said, the difficulty is that it's the legislative scheme as a whole that has that irrationality. The standard of reviewing legislation is higher than the standard of reviewing the regulations. So if it was only the regulations which were enacting something that was clearly irrational, you have a much easier route to reviewing it than the instance as here, where you actually have to challenge the AARTO Act as itself. And the problem with the AARTO Act as itself is that it's only in the implementation that it becomes irrational. So it's a bit of a chicken and an egg. If you went to court now to challenge the AARTO system, the judge would probably say, well, I must assume that they're going to implement it in a rational way, because that's the kind of deference that the courts will give to Parliament's choice of policy. But, you know, it's going to be the combination of features, I think, that will give it that fundamental irrationality. The legislation gives the ability to impose demerit points on juristic persons. It doesn't mean that it needs to be enacted in such a way that that is always the consequence and the only consequence. Also, as you say, a key problem with why that is not rational is that the nomination process is broken and there is no proper electronic platform in which to constantly access in real time information about individuals and vehicles and juristic persons and status, etc. And there isn't a rational way to interact with issuing authorities in real time. And I think that we all will sort of agree that the issuing authority is and their key role in the nomination process is where a lot of this falls down. Because if there was maybe even the RTIA that, processed and accepted nominations and redirections, etc., that maybe impose a level of rationality if there was a functioning electronic system. But it is this sort of combination of these factors that will make it difficult. Unfortunately, if government does something that's irrational, the only way to deal with it is through the courts. And there is this degree of deference that the courts show. So you unfortunately need to be getting to the point where it's really not working, in order to be able to really demonstrate that it's not, that the system is irrational. Even at this stage, you couldn't really go and challenge the system because the regulations are in draft. And so the DOT would say, but we're capable of changing these regulations. And so it's premature to challenge them. But, yes, there are standards by which these sorts of systems are judged. But unfortunately, it's in their functioning that you judge them. And in advance, it's quite difficult to go to court to change that. The option to change it now is at the policy level. And it's at the level, of BUSA, etc., where, you can really hope to get the ear maybe of, some business day journalists to kind of really start to get the notion of the fundamental problem that will be caused by the implementation of these regulations and the implementation of demerit points on the industry. So it's probably a lawyer's answer, neither a yes nor a no, but hopefully some context.
But just on the policy, it's clearly stated that they're allowed to communicate with us electronically, but we don't have the option to do so with them, you know. Isn't that a policy?
Well, you see, the thing is that there are, I don't think that, sorry, I don't think that the, you know, the devil is always in the detail. I don't think that there is an intention that they necessarily, that the legislation precludes you from communicating electronically, precludes there being a system that allows for electronic communication, you know, notwithstanding. So I think some of the irrational provisions are these provisions around, you know, 10 days to access the register and that kind of thing. I mean, that is clearly ridiculous, but it is possible even in other contexts to have a more of a real-time platform, even within the current legislative context. So I think the difficulty with that is that it's possible for them to implement it in that rational way, even though it seems like they don't intend to. But sure, you can comment on that, but all I'm saying is that you couldn't go to court now and challenge it.
Claire, could I follow up? There's something that Grenville's been on. In terms of, you've given us an overview, thank you very much, of how you proceed with what is the current, well, not the current, the future to be implemented legislation. The fact that the current system is ineffective, is there no way to attack the future because it hasn't arrived yet, based on the fact that the current system, which theoretically has a far fewer transactions involved, can we not attack it and say, well, the current system's not working, so trying to implement a new system, which may be legislated already, that is, and now trying to be implemented, trying to then do that and create a bigger mess? Is there no legal way of saying, well, let's make sure that the current system is effective, inverted commas, or something along those lines? Because you're from a legal point of view, from what I understand, is there's not a lot you can do until they enact the legislation itself.
Yeah, because I think they are actually going to use the current system. They're just going to force everybody else to be on the e-native system they're currently using.
So I think that certainly in making the comments, we've tried as much as possible to include instances where the functioning of the current system demonstrates the real problem that will arise when the new system is implemented. And certainly we've said to the subcommittee that we've met with that if there is to be a challenge mounted to the implementation of the new system, whatever packaged evidence you have of those failures would absolutely assist. So, for example, in the comments, we've absolutely tried to include specifics on the number of unsuccessful nominations that you currently are facing. I think the key difference is that at the moment, those unsuccessful nominations cause you a financial loss. In future, the unsuccessful nominations are going to cause the accumulation of demerit points and are going to cause the are going to then have the knock-on effects of having the license disc suspended, cancelled, not being able to sell the vehicle, etc., which obviously is a much more catastrophic impact and is going to to seriously impact on the business. For me, that is still, those discussions about that are still in the policy forum. If you're going to bring a challenge in due course, we need to be presenting as strong and as cogent arguments as possible to the Department of Transport to demonstrate that impact to them. So whatever else we can do in terms of packaging what actually happens today for those decision makers will be important. As I say, if you go to court now to challenge it, they will simply say, but we are still receiving comments. We are still in the process of discussing this. There are still engagements going on with NEDLAC. And in that context, they'll say it's premature. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It kind of clarifies where we are then, I think, as a team.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Claire?
I think there's also no harm in just stressing some of the points that are highlighted by Granville. They are, embedded in our response currently, but we can always just ensure that they are even much more pronounced as even before submission.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, what you're saying is a key feature of the submission. We've sort of categorized 3 or 4 main issues for discussion, and then gone into the detailed discussion. And the sort of the very pointed point that is made is that the current fleet standard business model is simply not accommodated by AARTO. And we sort of explain why that is. And we set out that as far as we can tell, there's been no mapping of the process of issuing infringement notices, nomination of drivers, payment of penalties, issuing of enforcement orders in the case of a rental company with no long-term relationship with the driver at the point of the infringement, multiple drivers of a single car, etc. And, I think that we try to emphasize throughout that is the fundamental irrationality in the system. It's the fact that there's no long-term relationship generally with the actual driver. A single vehicle has multiple drivers, and so imposing any kind of a consequence on that vehicle that has had multiple drivers who may have accumulated demerit points on the car with it simply has no rational relationship with any kind of road traffic imperative or any imperative of creating safer roads. And we do spend quite a lot of time talking about the fact that without a proper electronic platform for nominations, without proper interaction with the issuing authority, without any incentive on the issuing authority to actually accept the nomination, we can't see how the process can succeed. And I think, that was a key issue in what we were pointing out. There is that irrationality in the system. You need to redirect through the issuing authority. The issuing authority gets an infringement penalty payment, regardless of whether the nomination is successful or not. So, there's no real incentive on them to have a very efficient system. There's also obviously always been this slight irrationality in the system, in that the relationship between the issuing authority and the RTIA is an interesting one, because it is the issuing authority's infringement and infringement notice that is run through the RTIA system. So the RTIA doesn't benefit from the infringement penalty and from the fact that it's been issued. The RTIA is merely administering the system. So for so long as you have this sort of bounce between the issuing authority and the RTIA, you're always going to have this fundamental problem in the system with the nominations process, because actually the RTIA doesn't really have a role in bringing about the conclusion of the nomination process. And I think that, we do try to emphasize, but it, certainly in discussion needs more emphasis, that this is a problem at the moment with 2 issuing authorities, and 2 of the biggest, 2 capacitated issuing authorities that have, had a lot of time to get the pilot system up and running. The notion of extending this to 200 issuing authorities in due course, once the pilot rolls out, you just can't imagine how that can happen without there being a single seamless platform. So, that certainly is something that we do try to emphasize, with reference to examples of the number of unsuccessful nominations presently, the number of infringement notices currently processed, the number of interactions that your sector will need to have on a daily basis with the system, etc. So those certainly are all things that we've tried to highlight in the process. But as Sandile says, part of the problem is that there's just simply been no feedback for the last 3 years with the sector to explain how the concerns which have been consistently raised have been taken into account. Sandile, I don't know if there's particular aspects of the comments that you'd like me to deal with and to highlight. I can just sort of go through some of them in more detail. I could put them up if people wanted to comment, or people could just spend the time sort of reflecting and sending you through any comments that they have to sort of prepare to finalize the document in the next couple of days.
Look, I think at this stage, we've provided the members the feedback. Basically, I think we've given them feedback on the draft submission, which will be made in a couple of days. In my view, very little is going to change from that, because I think even what the discussion that has transpired, that has been taken into account in our response. However, as I said, we'll probably just make sure that it's more pronounced. I would rather we give the members an opportunity to just reflect. This was only circulated last night. This is the first time that as Savrala we've done this level of consultation, bearing in mind that even the metrics itself was circulated almost 3 weeks ago to the members. So they've had the opportunity to reflect on the various clauses that affect us. But it was important for us to, at least get you to just give some sort of level of feedback on the approach that we've taken. What I'm more interested in is just so that you share with members just some of the disjuncture that we've noticed between what we always term the policymakers and RTIA, for instance. These are agencies that are, have the responsibility for they own the implementation of these regulations. But there's policymakers that are sitting somewhere. And perhaps if you could just also just explain that to the members, how that works, because it does become a challenge for us who liaise with, in particular, the RTIA.
Yeah. No, I mean, from my perspective, the RTIA is very much what we call in administrative law a policy taker. The RTIA is established with a very specific purpose under the AARTO Act. And it's established with the purpose of implementing a scheme, the fundamentals of which have already been agreed. So, Parliament is ultimately our legislature. It's who we elect to carry out policy. The policy is generally developed within the department and the ministry. So in this case, the Department of Transport and the Minister of Transport are responsible for determining South Africa's policy direction, for determining how we manage and govern our transport networks, how we keep those networks flowing, how we deal as a country with the sorts of difficult policy issues that come in with public and private transport, intersections in the transport space between other economic clusters, between the tourism sector, particularly in this case. And it's supposed to be then at a ministerial level that these sorts of interactions happen to determine what really is our policy direction. When you come to actually establishing an agency like the RTIA, you're already very clear, that this is the sort of direction that you want to take. And that agency doesn't have an option to implement AARTO. And in fact, they are under significant pressure to simply act to implement as quickly as possible. And to sort of simply ramp up, they will have KPIs internally to do that. So it does become very difficult. What seems to have happened here is that no one else within the Department of Transport seems to have sufficient ownership of these aspects of transport policy. And it seems very much that the implementers within the RTIA are the people that you interact with. The RTIA's budget and its ability to determine the type of network or the type of electronic platform that it wants is constrained by that budget. So if it's not being given sufficient budget from Parliament to implement what it needs to implement, it isn't going to be able to make and to suggest changes properly to accommodate that. So, I do think that within BUSA and, within Savrala and within these sorts of sections of the sort of private sector, the interactions need to be sort of bumped up that level to the policy level, to the tourism minister, to the, department, the Minister of Transport, to sort of really be saying, do you really understand the impact that this is going to have? Do you really understand? We all agree demerits is something everyone laughs at insofar as, the individual driver is concerned and insofar as the sort of individual driver behavior is concerned. No one disagrees that in an individual context, we should all face the prospect of getting demerits on our own personal sort of driver behavior, etc., to the extent that that has been shown internationally to have an effect. But this has got nothing to do with that. This is now, having an insufficient understanding of how that, policy, which has got one imperative, is going to impact on fleets and on car rental companies, where it really has no ability at all to have the driver behavior imperative that it's supposed to have. So, unfortunately, as I say, the RTIA isn't really, the level at which this engagement can properly happen. A lot of the RTIA people are, they're traffic enforcement officials. That's the sort of, that's where they operate, and they're trying to design an efficient traffic enforcement system, but they're not able to really engage with the impacts on the tourism sector, the impacts on, fleets and on the economy. And, it really is at that level that the engagement needs to take place. And, we need to do our best to try and find access within BUSA and these agencies to bring that about.
No, thank you very much. Perhaps, we don't have much time left. I think we only left with about 10 minutes or so, 12 minutes. It would be interesting to, if, there's any more questions, particularly from, the financial services, which is the leasing side of our business. Whilst we have had, as some inputs, but I think, they were not as overwhelming as we received from car rental. And it's understandable that they may not be as affected as we are, but it would be interesting. I'll allow for just perhaps one or two other questions. We still have, I think another item on the agenda, just to give our president an opportunity to also just address, the members before we finish the meeting. Any more questions, colleagues? It does appear that there aren't any questions at this stage, but thank you very much, Claire. Part of the reason why I asked that, we are obviously engaging with all these pillars, all the agencies of transport, including the Department of Transport itself. And, as part of our strategic plans is to engage at the ministerial level, not only just with the Department of Transport, but also our own, where, particularly the car rental that falls within the tourism sector, to engage those ministers, to impress upon them just the impact on tourism itself. But yes, thank you very much. I know that Natalia has had to step out, but according to our, oh, there you are, she's back.
I
think at this,
I'm running around this morning. We're handing over to Corne, our president.
Yeah, let me just thank Claire. Thank you very much. I know that we haven't quite finished yet, and I'm looking forward to the members coming up with any sorts of other points that they may want to add, having reflected on the draft submission that we shared yesterday. But thank you very much, yourself and Lubumba, for working so well with us. I'd like to also, I know there's someone in the background who's also really played quite a pivotal role in this, just from a legal standpoint. I'd like to thank Danny. Danny is from from one of our members, is within the family, but he actually is with the Motors Group. He's really worked closely with myself. I'd like to just also extend my special thanks to him as well, because he's not directly involved in all the subcommittees. But yes, thank you very much. We have a couple of days again to continue on this until we post, and submit to the minister. Let me call upon our president, Kone Fente, who would like to just say a few words to the members. Over to you, Kone.
Thank you, Sandile, and thank you, Claire and Lubumba, for your inputs. I mean, really insightful. So, and thank you for all your efforts thus far. I know we've got a couple of tough days ahead of us. So yeah, so just from our side as well, just a word of thanks. I think, Sandile, just maybe to kick off, I mean, so it's not an address, it's more of an appeal. So I think just obviously as we face the issues with the new regulations, I think what I would like to do is just to request from each member to obviously submit comments themselves in their own capacities or in their business capacities, and not only rely on the Savrala submission. And I think to that extent, what I would like to do is just through Sandile, we would make resources available for you to obviously draft and formalize those submissions. I think so. We've done quite an extensive bit of work in terms of the Savrala submission, but I think the more collaboration and the more consistency we can get from an industry participation and submission, I think it'll carry more weight. And I think what will then happen is it'll obviously give us a little bit more airtime. So what I would like to do today is just call in every single member here, and even if you can just take it up the line, as I said, please do submit your own comments. I think also if you need resource to try and support you through that submission, I mean, that resource will be made available through Sandile. So I think just contact Sandile and we would be happy to try and assist you with those submissions, to try and get those submissions in. So we would like to try and get those in before the deadline. So I think there is a couple of heavy days lying ahead of us to try and get those submissions in. So just, yeah, so I think single request then is just make contact with Sandile as soon as you practically can. Have that conversation. Let's try and just get some resources behind what needs to be done. And I think let's get those submissions in and make sure that we at least have some impact as an industry and as a collective. That's all from my side. Thanks, Sandile.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kone. I think before closure, that was basically the last, almost the last item on our agenda. Am I correct, Natalia? Let me once more just thank the members for having made the time, to participate in this. The comments or the draft comments that were circulated to them are by no means they preclude many other concerns with the proposed amendments. However, we believe they give a clear signal that a much broader, deeper and sincere engagement is required between the Department of Transport, its agencies, and its stakeholders, as Claire pointed out, to ensure that the legislative focus is firmly placed on road safety and not on more efficient methods to generate volumes of infringement notices to raise revenue, which seems to be the case. And we are thankful for this opportunity to make this a final comment, at this stage, and we really are looking forward to engaging further with the department and powers that be, in order to move South Africa road safety priority forward. I'd like to, at that point, thank the members for their participation, and once more thank the, in particular, the focus group, which has been the AARTO, subcommittee of Savrala, for all their inputs and support. We really appreciate that. And on that note, let me also thank Natalia, who's forever available for us, for coordinating, this Zoom meeting, and and thank those who may have connected, through other means that were made available, like Facebook and YouTube. Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon. We'll catch you next time. And thank you so much for joining us today. Goodbye, everyone.